Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is LA Currents. Ponder this. 3 bodybuilders go into a gym, but it's not any ordinary gym. It's in Los Angeles, the entertainment capital of the world. And they all just happen to be writers. What happens next? Strong words, of course. I'd like to introduce the founder of Strong Words, a live storytelling event, Larry Dean Harris. All right, sounds like the beginning of a great movie, a great novel. How the heck did you guys get together and decide to turn your idea into a live storytelling experience from meeting in a gym?
I think it all starts, as any storytelling does, with the desire to share, to tell your story. It was a random thing. There was a sign on the bulletin board. Writers wanted, let's read our work aloud. And 3 of us got together and we literally performed in a storefront, a little lamp shop in Silver Lake, in front of our friends and fellow gym members. And it was such a spectacular night. I mean, the energy, there was something about the dynamic of the place, and literally standing on a pickle box and just sharing stories. It was very raw. It was just the essence of storytelling, the actual words and someone telling them personally. That sort of connected with this crowd, and we realized we had something here, and we decided to run with it.
They should actually introduce the wonderful person over your shoulder here,
Michael Hirabayashi.
You met him at the gym too?
Of course.
Okay, so Michael Hirabayashi, you are a photographer, and somewhere along the line, this storytelling event blossomed into more than just story words.
Yeah, it's a combination of several different things. It's storytelling, which is the primary focus, and then there's music, and then there's also the visual art. And I think that both the music that we show, that we feature, the storytelling that Larry features, and the visual arts that I try to feature gives us a more complete human experience.
Okay, so let's actually paint this picture. The first time your 3 writers got together, you decided to do a live event, and it was just the 3 of you and like 2.5 people in the audience, and Michael wandered in. I mean, how did all of that, because obviously it's grown over the since you started in 2011, and Michael's added those components that you have mentioned, art and music. So how did this all blossom?
We probably had 25 to 30 folks in the first crowd, and it literally grew organically, just word of mouth. We've never really had any focused type of marketing because it is a community. It didn't start that way, but it's grown to become one, fortunately. And people tell their friends, you won't believe this. You know, in 90 minutes, we're going to give you 5 stories of musical guests, an amazing pop-up art show. There's going to be wine, and there's going to be conversation afterwards, and it's free.
Well, that's always the excellent, that's the best price for any kind of ticket. So, all right, over the years, it's created its own format, and you've actually sort of, I'm sure, made it more streamlined and more way. But what type of stories are being told, and how are you deciding what stories are being told, and what is the point of the stories that are being told, and how does that fit with the art and the music and everything?
Sure. Well, we call it storytelling for grown-ups. It's definitely an adult audience. There are basically 3 rules for stories. Must be true, must be you, as in your story told in the first person, and 1,350 words or less, which to me, you can tell a lot of story in that amount of time. That's what separates stories from essays. Essays can be 25, 3,000 words, not a problem to read, but exhausting to listen to. So we really, you know, we try to program our shows to be a mixed bag. We rarely do themes unless we do a holiday show, which is always incredible. But it's just more, I look for stories that sort of grab me by the soul.
Oh, that's a great phrase. You should actually use that.
I think I do every once in a while.
Okay. I mean, we are in the entertainment capital of the world. People are incredibly talented. People do want an opportunity to showcase their work that may not necessarily lead to employment, but hopefully will maybe. So is that one of the reasons people want to tell stories? Are they working out their craft? Are they working out something that they might be able to utilize in the future? Or is it for the pure sake of sharing an experience, like, oh, you know, with a group of people who would appreciate it?
We have a really diverse group of performers. Some who have been doing this for a very long time. Folks like Annabelle Gurwitch, who people might recognize. We've had TV folks like John Bowie from Big Bang Theory. But what I really love is when someone from our audience comes to me and says, I think I'd like to do this. Right. And they get up, and because it's
On the
so
fly?
honest. Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
But they'll submit. They'll send me their story. Sometimes I'll have to help them a little bit, but I don't tell people what to say. I will help them, but I would never want to sort of dictate their form. But we've had performers who are just over the top, insane, you know, crazy. And we had one woman get up and tell a story, and she barely whispered into the microphone because that's who she was. Aww. But let me tell you, everyone in the venue leaned forward and was with her. And that's the power of storytelling, because it's not sort of the wowy presentation form. It's telling your truth in a compelling way, and letting people know that there's a connection between stage and the audience, and we're really fortunate to have that.
That's one of the things that I would think, because you also will hear things that you never necessarily hear. You're going to learn about someone in a way that maybe they would not express to you if they were just meeting you in a casual affair or something like that. I imagine that this is a very emotional experience for both the audience and the storyteller.
Absolutely. There's laughter, of course. Laughter's big. But boy, there's nothing better than right in the middle of a funny story where you hit them with something very powerful. What's really interesting too is a lot of times we will have people, this guy one day said to me, I have a story.
And you ignored him.
I did. I absolutely did. I forgot all about it. And then one day he reminded me, and I pulled it out, and I was like, wow, this is powerful stuff. And that to me is the best part of this, is when we had an amazing singer-songwriter, and she got up and blew the audience away. And afterwards, I said, thank you for coming. And she said, yeah, it was really good to be on stage again. I haven't performed in years. Aww. And I said, that sounds like a story. And she said, it is. She took our workshop, and then she got up and told the story, and it was powerful. It was a story about having a stalker.
Oh, dear.
And how it stopped her from performing for a long time. And I mean, what a triumph.
Right.
And then for her to tell that story and then put on her guitar and sing, I mean, the room was just like on fire.
Okay, but I do have to ask, you said it was a very powerful story, and I happen to know what the story was, Michael, but you need to at least share a little bit about what it was that you wanted to get across and what it was that you wanted to share.
My story was about my mother and her experiences during World War II. And my family, actually, because my father was also part of that story. My father was interned in camp. My mother's family went to Japan just prior to Pearl Harbor. And they were from Hiroshima. So they spent the war in Japan. Then the atomic bomb happened, and they survived. But I think the story is telling in that it reflects back on what's going on now with a lot of the tribalization of America, right, and into various political camps and racial camps, religious camps.
And that's a very, very powerful story.
And I think it's dangerous.
It is. Well, we have a lot more to talk about.
Yep.
But right now, we're just going to take a quick break.
I was in my 20s in the 1960s and lived on a houseboat for 5 years off City Island in the Bronx, just across the bay from LaGuardia Airport. My husband and I had one baby, wanted another, and were trying to beat what we thought might become the high cost of apartment living in Manhattan. Boat owners don't pay property taxes, John said. All we would pay are the charges to tie up at the dock. Now, I'm not sure that I knew what property taxes were, and both of us knew even less about boats. But we were young enough to believe that surely one of us knew what they were doing. I mean, after all, we were married, we were parents. What could go wrong? The boat was a two-story behemoth originally built by the Navy toward the end of World War II to serve as temporary office of some sort in the South Pacific. It had long been sold into civilian use, and each owner had cavalierly added another room or deck with little regard for aesthetics and absolutely none for seaworthiness. It went like this. We bought it in October, and in the first winter we abandoned ship with regularity to stay with friends on the Upper West Side for a few nights until the killing winds died down. The skies would darken to a dirty green, the wind stilled, but then, without warning, the barn of a boat would repeatedly lift up as if pushed by some invisible force, and then the whole affair would sickeningly drop straight back down, the floating dock slamming the sides of the hull, while the thick links of chains that tied us to the piling screamed and grated like a breaking train. So, often in winter months, we bundled up and we set off for the parking lot way in the distance, managing miraculously to stay upright on the sheet of ice covering several lengths of bucking and lurching dock. Every year, driving into the city safe and warm, we plotted the ad we would call into the New York Times the next morning in capital letters: houseboat, live aboard, unique New York living, no property taxes. But each spring, by the end of May, when we could leave the windows open and the smell of newly cut grass in Pelham Bay Park blew across the water, when the hull shifted in a low tide, all crunchy and dense, when the days had begun to lengthen and the sun slowed as it set, hanging for a moment behind the skyline of Manhattan, when we could hear salsa music from a boombox passing on a fishing boat, well, we canceled the ad until next January or February. We crossed paths, my husband and I. He worked nights in the city, and I was an actress cruising in and out of recording studios, singing in rehearsal halls, auditioning at ad agencies. On the boat, after dinner, when John had gone to work and I had read my 4-year-old to sleep, I cleared the table, opened the door onto the bow, I sat down, and I wrote. I wrote about living on a boat and being cold, about stapling plastic sheeting over the windows and watching it belly out from the wind. I wrote about babies and laundry, about money and where it might come from, about my mother railing against her depression and pleading for her approval. I wrote about having married too young and a false idea of love. I wrote about not being in love with my husband and how lousy that made me feel. I wrote about sex and orgasms and longing and determination and chicken pox and bounced checks and being trapped and feeling mighty anyway. But I also wrote about lobsters and scotch and my hero, Howard, a retired fireman who looked after me. He walked down to us every afternoon. Well, girlie, give me a little kiss. And he'd hold on just a little too long while I kissed his cheek, pulling away and laughing at him. Then I poured him a shot of scotch and he said, "First of the day." I wrote about Wid, the island drunk who stayed in the laundromat to keep warm in winter, reading Steppenwolf and Faulkner. And Marianne, the lesbian who lived on a barge at a mooring and rode into land every morning and then back to her boat at night. How she looked like a man until one day she smiled at me, and in a moment she was a pretty girl. I wrote about the intensely green lines of moss, no bigger than a lead pencil, that grew in the seams of the deck, and how, if you put your face very close to them, they looked and smelled like a miniature forest. I wrote about the nearness of sounds, of voices over water. I wrote about the Latinos from the Bronx who jammed the one main street on weekends, bumper to bumper, radios blaring all the way to the end of the island to buy fried fish and eat outside, the seagulls brazenly diving in dangerous circles around their tables and over their children's heads. I was a young girl. I was lonely, but I didn't know that until much later. It wasn't a journal, and it wasn't a diary. I was just talking on paper.
A slice of time. Thank you, Claudette. All right, so now we're back with Larry Dean Harris, but we have someone special sitting next to you. We have Marlena Nichols, who is also someone you met at the gym.
Yep.
You're meeting everyone at the gym.
Met Michael at the gym, met Marlene at the gym. We have an amazing gym.
Apparently so, and a very creative one at that. Because Marlene, you are actually the Director of Education and Outreach. So,
I am.
so that's a lofty title. Apparently this storytelling experience has blossomed over the years into something a lot bigger, badder, bolder, and broader. So what does the Director of Education do?
Well, there are a couple of things that we wanted to do. So Strong Words, once it was established as this really like high energy live performance, people started doing two things. One, they were saying, well, what about us who live somewhere outside of LA? How do we see you? So we thought, oh, the idea of touring, taking sort of either a smaller version or then sometimes the full version of the show and taking it on the road. We've been in Palm Springs, we've been in Toledo, Ohio. We have plans to do more in the future.
We went to North Hollywood.
We went to North Hollywood.
Did you really?
We've
Yeah,
been
we did.
downtown LA. And every audience has its own feel to it, so it's a great challenge for our performers to see what it's like in other places and how the audience receives them, because like live performance is very much about energy to energy, that feeding loop, like heartbeat to heartbeat. And then the other thing is, education-wise, is really, we are in the era of what is your story? Everything's story, from branding to leadership to personal essays. How do you express yourself? And we started doing these intro and then advanced classes to storytelling where we take somebody and they come in with nothing. They're like, I just want to do this. And then over the course of 3 weeks to 6 weeks, they blossom. So it's not just something that they might tell their friends. This is something that a larger audience can not only listen to, but benefit from. And then the audience in turn goes and says, I want to tell my own story.
Okay, so, and this includes you because you have a lot of writing experience. You're a playwright, you're in advertising and everything. So does this tangibly mean that you will help someone edit what they have? Just let them put a whole bunch of stuff on the page and then, without changing them, hone their craft a bit?
Yeah, we'll guide them, most certainly. We provide some tools. She does fantastic creative exercises to get people. Here's the funny thing. We co-teach this class, and Marlene was leading the class on an exercise, and I was just going to veg out, and then all of a sudden, my pen starts writing, and the next thing you know, I have a story, which is the story I actually performed at the library back in February.
It even worked with the pros.
Yeah, it came out of an exercise. That's kind of how crazy it works. It's just lighting that spark, giving people the impetus to dare to move forward with their story.
So Marlene, you tell stories as well, and you've been with Larry for a long time here. Acting background, writing background, all of the above background. What drew you to this now passion project that's been going on for 9 years?
I would say that I come from a background of curiosity. And there is the side of me that is the 4-year-old who just constantly wants to be there and like, tell me another story, tell me another story. So I came at it from a writer's perspective. And then I had sort of toyed with being an actress, but I just wasn't castable, frankly. So I thought, I'm going to have to do my own work. And then being on stage and having that level of both control, but mixed with an artistry that you've got to keep pushing and keep discovering, that sort of let me blossom and seek out the storytelling world. Because it's you on stage and what you want to tell the audience, it's your time. And you are the one who develops that relationship to them. And so then working with Larry too, and being somebody who's been able to have stage time on Strong Words over the years, like you get stronger and feistier and a little bit more experimental, and you're willing to try things that gives you kind of not an authority but an ownership of.
Well, we should actually clarify because we've talked a lot about the ideas, the concepts, and how this all works. Started in Silver Lake,
Yep.
has since moved.
To Atwater Village, next door.
Okay.
We're in a glorious outdoor venue. It's a church courtyard.
Nice.
So we're outside under the stars, if you can see them. And at Christmas time for our holiday show, everybody bundles up
Yep.
and we make hot cider and we put on a show in the dead of winter outside.
Well, LA in the dead of winter is not really.
still gets pretty chilly at
unless you're
night.
going to do it in Toledo, Ohio, which I'm sure is a story of how strong words. I can see Palm Springs. I can even see North Hollywood. Toledo, Ohio seems to be an interesting venue for you to have been asked to go to.
Well, Toledo's my hometown.
Okay, it's no longer the mystery.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And,
Mystery solved.
But let me tell you, they love stories there, and we're going back this next spring, and we're doing a big show. We're taking the whole LA crew to Toledo, Ohio, to perform in a museum, which we're finding establishing relationships and doing and partnering with.
Cultural organizations and museums especially, so it still feeds into our mission of keeping music, art, and stories on the table. So we've had a collaboration with the Palm Springs Art Museum for the last year where we bring stories into the galleries, and then we'll be doing our full show in January there. And we find that that works really well to also garner a different audience. Somebody, because when you say storytelling, not everybody quite knows what that is. They know what acting is, they know what theater is, but storytelling is really this human aspect of the person next to you. You never know what's gone on in their lives. And then when they get a shot at the stage to tell you, you're blown away, sort of like Michael.
So if you, okay, I would imagine that before you are a storyteller, you should attend the Strong Words event.
Absolutely.
So what's the process? I have a story. Everybody has a story. You have a story. You have a story. Everybody in this room has a story. We watch, and then how do we get to be on your stage and maybe go to Toledo with you next year?
Yeah, maybe the following year. The first thing is you really do have to come to the show. You have to understand our dynamic because our audience is so unique. It is not a showbiz audience. These are people who don't have aspirations, most of them, of entertainment industry lives. These are people who come for the sheer love of the story. And I love them because now they bring baked goods.
Oh.
They participate. We've really created this community. We have this exercise at the end of the night where everyone puts their own chair away because it.
Because you got tired of putting the chairs away.
Yeah, it's the hardest job, you know, cleaning the bathrooms and putting the chairs away.
Well, and two is it grows from like 25 to 75 to 125.
Okay, that's true.
It's a lot more chairs.
And we've also had this wonderful relationship with the library, the Los Angeles Public Library, where we're doing this show every year in the Mark Taper Auditorium, and to 265 people. And it's packed, and the library loves it because we can fill the room. And what better place to hear stories than in the House of Stories, right?
So you do say it is an adult event, but what's your line of an adult? And I'm sure that you're also being very cautious about what's in a story so that it has some, you have some editorial control in that regard slightly. So where do you see your audience? Who is your audience? Who would love this? Who would enjoy this?
I think anyone who wants to live in the moment, anyone who wants to put their phone down, turn off their television set, and turn off the computer and just come have that instant connection that you can only get from a live storytelling event, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and it's something that you want a place you can go. We have people who come every single month and who come for the last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Some of our audience has been there from the beginning. And there is something when you can just be, there's a person next to you and you can say, oh my, did you just hear that? I was crying. That was amazing. There is an interaction here that doesn't happen on a daily basis necessarily in the world we live in today.
So cathartic experiences, humorous experiences, wonderful experiences. You've mentioned a story that kind of captured your heart when you were listening, as well as Michael and what his story. So Marlene, has there been something that has shifted, a story that has shifted something inside of you or awakened something inside of you or is memorable for you?
Gosh, there are so many.
Is it like asking about your favorite child?
It sort of is, because in getting to work with some of our storytellers through our classes, you get so excited because they come with something that's just a kernel, and then they're up on stage. There was a wonderful story recently about a woman who was talking about how she has used her body over the years. And she's did it while she was on her second child. She's now 7 months pregnant. So she had a beautiful glitzy dress on, and she talked about being young, being in her 20s, and now she's on her second child. So it was priceless. And she had everybody on their feet at the end applauding.
There's also something else that we haven't even addressed here, is that the number one fear is to speak in front of people. And this is a great way to get over it, because you're in an environment of people who are actually actively caring about what it is that you're saying. So I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but I was just sitting there thinking about, you're getting people who have not had this experience up on stage.
Absolutely. And it's funny because we do have the most empathetic audience ever. And I always tell people that. I say, I can't think of a safer place to get up and tell your story than our venue, because there is this element of caring. I mean, the fact that people get out of their house and they drive and they find a parking space 3 blocks away, and they get there early and they stake out their seat, and then they go on to the neighborhood and then they come back and have a glass of wine. You know, it's a commitment. They commit to our show and they come back again and again. And I just can't think of anywhere else where you can do that in Los Angeles.
And you do this once a month?
Once a month.
And there are about how many stories per night?
5 stories a night.
5 stories a night?
2
Always
or 3 songs.
Okay.
Pop-up art gallery, so you get to see it for one night only.
Nice.
A lot of work goes into it.
Nice.
And then at the end, we clean up, and you would never know we were there.
Strong Words is a destination event.
How did you
really
find
is.
the venue, by the way?
We're lucky. We've partnered with an Episcopalian church,
Okay.
and we go where they go.
Okay, so because when you left Silver Lake, did you think the whole thing was going to be over then?
Yeah, it was a scary time. You know, there had been some title shifts politically, and we were like, what do we do next? And then this venue opened up, and we thought, oh wow, outside. It was the best thing that happened.
And Strong Words lives on, which, of course, is a great way to remember the website, strongwordslive.com. All right. Well, Larry, Marlena, thank you so much for being
you.
with us.
Thank you.
And that is LA Currents.